said something about the deity and yells out, "Smoke alarm!" It turns out we'd broken the engine's exhaust line, which proved to be fairly easy to fix, but we learned that people will not always wake up to the presence of smoke or the sound of smoke alarms. When it was all over, Eric employed the age-old balm to British nerves, tea. "Shall I put the kettle on, Joey?" A phrase we'd hear many times each day. A bit now about our food, a saga which may be called the Tomato Can Chronicles. Eric did all the cooking, and considering how I cook, I was mighty pleased about that. With no cooking to do, Joey and my job was cleaning up. One of Eric's favorite things to wash was instant potatoes. There is no glue on earth stronger than instant potatoes mixed with Dawn and cold seawater. The potatoes will not come off the pan. This is a formula that could be used for stucco. Cold seawater for washing up? Did I mention we had no hot water on Fiona? We had only one flavor of soup on board, tomato, case after case of tomato soup. Now, here's one of Eric's favorite recipes. This one made with tomato paste. Before you get too excited about trying this one at home, however, please do note Forsyth's disclaimer. Remember, it always tastes better at sea. He's probably right. I don't think we'll find Eric anytime soon on the Food Channel. Although we weren't underfed, we always felt hungry. Remember the motion of the sea and the ever-present cold. A person burns a lot of energy in that environment. Joey felt like he was starving, a young man's metabolism and all. He literally licked his plate clean after each meal. He said he wanted to secure every calorie, and besides, it made the plate easier to wash. The biggest icebergs in the world come from the world's greatest iceberg nursery. Glaciers from the 10,000 feet thick Greenland ice cap make their way to sea and calve off monsters. This is where the iceberg that sank Titanic began its trip. The most prolific spot for iceberg production is a place called Disco Bay. Another feature of this area is fog. Thick summer fog is the prominent weather condition. Ice and fog present an interesting combination. They are the same color. Fiona had a radar, a 25-year-old radar that Eric didn't want to use very much for fear of wearing out its bearings. But even when it is used, radar does not always paint or show icebergs. Icebergs have all these interesting shapes and angles that give them stealth, makes them often invisible to radar, like a B-2 bomber. But running into an iceberg was a kind of little picture problem. We had a strategic big picture problem as well. The University of Colorado at Boulder and the Canadian Ice Service both put out very good ice charts. The Canadians put theirs out twice a day. We had an Iridium satellite phone, but for whatever reason, the charts we were downloading were all 2 days old. Since ice can move at sea a long way in just 1 day, we were in need of better data. Now, my sister Deb back in Virginia had expressed an interest in following our trip, so I thought she might volunteer to do a little work for us. Via the single sideband radio, I fired off a message to her, which she got as an email. I requested that she send us daily distillations of what she could learn about the ice from the current charts. I suggested she just send us some recommended routing. Just shoot us a few waypoints, I said, on how to clear areas of concentrated ice by, say, 20 miles or so. I knew she was in for a pretty steep learning curve when I received the reply from her, "What is a waypoint?" She certainly rallied, though. She taught herself how to read what are called ice egg charts, EEG charts, send waypoints, decipher weather and wind reports, and then since the data link we got was so slow, send us her reports in small, concise messages, a difficult thing requiring sharp editing. In the middle of Baffin Bay now, 900 miles from the North Pole, we still weren't doing a lot of sailing. Maybe 10% of the time did the wind puff strong enough. So we motored and we burned fuel. Even though we'd made 2 unscheduled fuel stops in Greenland at Sisimiut and Upernavik, I was worried we weren't going to have enough diesel fuel. I was using my airplane formula. Go to the destination, our planned destination, Resolute, on to an alternate, and then have reserve fuel. It was possible our planned destination, Resolute, our gas station, was going to be iced in, and we'd have to push on another 300 miles to Joahaven without stopping for fuel. That was going to be tight. Eric pointed out correctly that Fiona was a sailboat. Said we always had the option of waiting for wind. The old whalers up here didn't have diesel, he said. Still, wind was not developing. The Arctic can be stormy. It blew a gale twice on our trip, and most of the time, in the middle of summer, it just doesn't produce a whole lot of wind. Often, Baffin Bay looks like a farm pond. I was getting worried we'd have to end our trip by returning to Greenland. But we did sail without using the engine, just enough to keep the formula balanced, just enough fuel on paper to meet the trip's contingencies, just barely. We entered the Canadian archipelago just south of Cape Sherard. We had entered the most challenging part of the Northwest Passage. Saying goodbye to big icebergs, here you say hello to a new problem, pack ice. Pack ice is the floating sea ice of the polar regions. Driven by winds and ocean currents, pack ice is a mixture of ice fragments of varying size and age that are squeezed together and can leave the sea surface with little or no open water. It creates a bit of bother for ships and boats, especially small plastic ones like our fiberglass Fiona. Fiona, while she was livable, deep cleaning was getting to be an issue. By the time we'd reached Canadian waters, Fiona was getting a little odoriferous. We couldn't wash our clothes. Besides, it was so chilly that we wore most of them all of the time. To clean ourselves or the boat with soap and water meant freezing. The boat had no hot water, and its furnace seemed to put out the heat of a Christmas tree bulb. I did use bleach a couple of times in the head, the bathroom, which caused a good deal of excitement among my crewmates. A novelty, an innovation. You would have thought I'd invented fire. Traveling down Lancaster Sound, which proved to be half full of pack ice, we arrived at Beechey Island. This is where everybody stops, including Franklin and Amundsen. Indeed, it was Franklin who named the bay after his ships, Erebus and Terror. Franklin overwintered here on his ill-fated journey. This is where his trip's first deaths occurred. We visited the grave sites, stark white markers standing strong against the winds and winters. In 1984, the body of John Torrington, Franklin's 21-year-old stoker, was exhumed. Scientists wanted to find out what had killed Franklin's men. In Torrington's case, it proved to be pneumonia. While in Erebus and Terror Bay, Fiona met the Russian ship Academic Ioffe, the French Fleur Astral, and the motor yacht Begin, these last two also making attempts on the Northwest Passage. Still, even with the crowded anchorage, the land is lonely. Animals are widely dispersed. The only ones in normal evidence are the birds, especially the fulmar, a petrel, which was our constant companion all the way from Greenland. In the cold, wee hours on deck, my friend Fulmar provided comfort. If I ever noticed he was out of sight, it seemed my mere thought was enough to call him back into formation, flying along with Fiona. The landscape here in the Arctic, everywhere in the far Arctic, is stark. Only a few very tiny lichens and mosses grow. Once in a while, you'll find a single flower, an Arctic poppy pushing out from the gravel. It seems each one will be the last one. It seems each one is a kind of accident. An overnight motor sail from Beechey Island brought us to the crumbling limestone Cornwallis Island. We maneuvered through pack ice to get there, but our gas station, Resolute Bay, was clear of ice. Cornwallis Island is at the very center of the Canadian Arctic archipelago. Scoured by ice sheets and glaciers of the ice ages, its surface has been ground to gravel. The village of Resolute, a functional rather than artfully constructed affair, is dusty and littered with bones. Everywhere there are seals being used for dog food, bear heads and fish hanging about. One guy offered to sell me some polar bear teeth. I said, thanks, but I already have a dental plan. The Canadians believe the best way to assert their sovereignty of the Arctic islands is with permanent residence. So after World War II, Canada relocated people from several different Inuit villages to Resolute. For a while, this created quite a bit of societal conflict. But over the years, despite its Frankenstein beginning, Resolute has become something more of a functioning community, although still racked with the typical Arctic problems of domestic violence, alcoholism, and teen pregnancy. Before we'd even dropped anchor, Joey noticed what he called Resolute's proactive recycling program. Unwanted items are dropped in a pile at the water's edge and left to rust in the sea. The village looks like it was built on a landfill at a gravel pit. But hold on now. About the time one succumbs to despair over the smells and the mess, we may remember that the community is frozen and covered in ice 9 months of the year. Under the aurora borealis, with everything under a blanket of snow, I know it is quite beautiful. We had arrived in high summer, when all was laid bare and ripe. The place smelled like a dead mouse. The multicolored houses are all prefabs and door locks are illegal. Back on Fiona, we had one single-shot shotgun. Before leaving the States, I'd asked Eric about our firepower. I was thinking about polar bears. Eric assured me all is well on that score. When I got to Nook, he'd shown me his prize 12 gauge. I wondered if the old shotgun had been built by the Blunderbuss Company. To accompany the museum piece, Eric had brought only 3 shotgun shells. I bought some more. Growing up in Alaska, I'd heard too many stories about polar bears, always curious, always hungry, always hunting. Did you pick up when I said there were no door locks in Resolute? Yes. In Resolute, they take bears seriously. Every building must be considered a bear escape route, so no locks on any door is the law. We planned on being there in Resolute for one day, just long enough to top off the fuel, eat, and clean up, all made possible by the Tanzanian-born Pakistani innkeeper, Ozzy Karaj. Have you ever gone a couple of weeks without a shower? It's hard to describe the wonderful feeling of hot water pounding on skin unused to moisture. We waited some extra days in Resolute because the waters in Peel Sound to our south were still jammed with ice. While waiting, we were joined in the harbor by a German sailboat, Perithia, and again by Fleur Astral. Now, Fleur is owned by renowned French sailor Philippe Poupon. Philou was accompanied on his Northwest Passage attempt by a Jack Russell Terrier, his 4 children, ages 12 down to 1, his wife, the French actress Geraldine Denon, and 1 male crew member. We learned that the male crew member, George, was not a sailor. He was Geraldine's makeup man from the movies. Philou was essentially sailing by himself with passengers. One morning, we looked outside, completely clear the night before. The bay was now completely full of ice. We were beset, stuck. We'll let Eric pick up the story from here.
During the night, this ice wall moved into Resolute Harbour. We had to get the anchor over. We got to get out before we trapped in here. One lead, we can still get through. But you know, that little piece of ice there is moving out. See it there? About 4:30, big convulsion, and we found that the bay was filling up with ice, and we moved, and about an hour oscillated around, wondering what to do. We couldn't get out, there was no lead out. We were trapped in the north corner of the bay. And finally we went to ground as the tide was falling. We heeled over to 40 degrees by about 10 o'clock this morning. And we got through all that, and then by 2 o'clock, 2:30, we got upright again, and we moved around the dinghy, pushed the bow out. The German guy next door helped us a bit. We were able to power off the mud and come anchor here in 15 feet total depth.
Myself, what is he thinking coming too close to land?
Well, the problem is the ice pushed us in. We couldn't get away, and the other sailboat had the only deep place left.
Yeah.
So, no problem. I mean, the water came back in and we floated out.
Yeah.
Life get any worse, Joe?
Say again?
Life get any worse?
Oh, only if we ran out of beer.
Yeah.
Have we ran out of beer?
We ran out of beer, Joe.
So now you know how those guys got into that fix. I mentioned Fiona's aromatics earlier. When this bear swam by, he looked like he could not decide whether to eat the boat or bury it. It looks like we may have inspired him to do a little rug cleaning of his own. All told, we were in Resolute for about 10 days. We got pretty antsy. You see, we weren't sure that our passage would be accomplished before the seawater starting to freeze again in September. So time underway was precious. While we were waiting, we heard a man calling from shore, "Are you looking for crew?" David Wilson, a carpenter.